Well, good morning, everyone. Today we are starting our new sermon series called Heroes. And we're going to be talking about some of our local heroes. This week we are talking about teachers. Next week the fire department's going to be here. Unless they have an emergency, their truck's going to be here, and we're going to have a big thing for the fire department. And then in 2 weeks we're going to be talking about nurses and medical professionals and celebrating them. So today is about teachers. And in the spirit of teaching, I just could not help but think and continue to come back to the idea that we need to talk about not only teachers and how much we appreciate them, but we also need to talk about just the ministry of teaching. The gospel of Christ is full of commandments and teachings and instructions on not only the wisdom of God, but also that we need to take the experiences that we have and share those with other people. So I've spent a great deal of my life and energy and effort trying to find the world's greatest taco. Okay, this is a major and significant part of what I do, is try to find tacos. As a matter of fact, I have traveled. I don't know if the word extensively, but I've traveled quite a bit in South America, Central America, and Mexico. At about 6 hours south of Mexico City, there's a little Mixteco village called Mineleon. Mixteco is a Native American tribe, like, Apache or Navajo or Cherokee or whatever. And in Mineleon, they speak Mixteco. They don't speak Spanish, they speak Mixteco. Really difficult language to understand. In this tiny little village of a couple of thousand people, there's 2 taco stands. The taco stand on the top of the hill, if you eat there, you will get parasites and you will be on your back for at least 3 to 4 days. The taco stand on the bottom of the hill, perfect, okay? So, if you ever go to Mineleon, you should eat at the taco stand at the bottom of the hill, not at the top of the hill. Got it? Okay? Now, the reason I tell you that story is not because I think you're ever going to go to that town. It would be a very odd series of coincidences if you ever got there. The reason I tell you that is to illustrate this point, that each and every person on this earth has a set of unique experiences that very few other people have. And because each and every one of us have unique experiences that others don't have, we all have things that we can teach one another. Does that make sense? You've experienced God, you've experienced other people, you've experienced things in ways that no one else has, especially your relationship with Christ. Is that God has done things in your life in a certain way that He's not done to or for anybody else. And because of that, you have sort of a special and unique understanding of how God relates to people that most everybody else in your circle does not have. Therefore, I think that God calls each and every one of us to be teachers, to teach the positive and wonderful things that God has for us to the people that are in our lives and in our community. So here's the commandment. We are called to teach one another about the grace and the love of Jesus Christ. Because God has worked in your life in a unique way, God has enabled you, therefore, to be touched by God. And that touch, that movement, that thing that God has done in your life provides you this unique and special opportunity to show God's love in this way to the world around you. This is from the book of Colossians. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through the psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts. You see, the fact that God tells us all to teach one another comes from the fact that each and every one of us have experiences, knowledge, and things that we have to offer to the world. You've got unique experiences, unique encounters with God, and unique encounters with other people that you, in fact, are able to share as a blessing to the rest of the world, which is our next one. When we learn of God's grace, we are expected to share it with others in service to one another. This is kind of a classic sermon metaphor, but I'm going to use it anyway. So imagine for a second that you're trapped in the desert, and you're thirsty and you're dying, and you come across a well. You go to the well, you get the drink of water, it saves your life, and you continue on your way, now no longer in danger of dying. A few miles later, you come across another person who's also wandering in the desert, who also looks like they're about to die, and they say, I need water, where can I find some? You, of course, are going to say, over there, right? It would be cruel not to. Because you are a human being that cares for other human beings, you will take that knowledge and experience that you have and share that with someone else in hopes that it would be a blessing to them. Folks, the things that God gives to you in knowledge and experience, in hope and love, the fact that you know that you were created by a master who made you for a purpose, the fact that you know that you can be forgiven of things even when you're wrong, the fact that you know that you will be cared for when you feel like you won't be, that's a gift. Teachers in the classroom offer the knowledge that they impart as a service to their students, not because they're going to get a ton out of it, but because they believe that this is a blessing to the people who receive it. So when you and I are trying to figure out what it is that we are called to do, all those experiences and knowledge and things that God gives to us, that stuff can be offered not just because we're commanded to, but in service out of love to the people that we care for. This is from the book of 1 Peter. Each of you should use whatever gift you've received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. I hear often people, especially when we talk about the faith, oh, I can't, teach other people about the faith of God. I'm not a Bible scholar or whatever. And you don't have to be, right? Today we're talking about the word that I always like to use is a witness, right, in a courtroom. There's the witness and then there's the expert witness. The expert witness comes in. He or she studied some kind of science and knows all these things and can testify to things that she didn't see or he didn't see firsthand, but that, they're the expert on. A regular witness, which is what you and I are, is someone who just testifies to the things that they have seen. And so if God has touched or influenced or moved you in a positive and wonderful way, you are called by God then, as you live in the desert, to take that love and grace that God has given you and offer that to others, not as an authoritative figure, but simply as a witness saying, listen, this is what God's done for me, and I pray that God might do that for you. Because if we do it right, God offers us forgiveness when we don't feel like we deserve it. God gives us hope when we feel hopeless. God assures us that we are cared for when sometimes we don't feel like we will be. He gives us peace and love. He gives us joy even when bad things happen. And that sort of stuff is a gift to the world and to you and to me in a powerful and unbelievable way that will move and transform. And if we can find the strength, the courage, if we can find the fortitude to be able to share that stuff and not, back to my deal here, not hide the well, right? Because if the guy in the desert asked you where the well was and you said, I don't know, that's just mean, right? And so if you find something that's helpful and hopeful for your life, then you are then encouraged to share that with others. That's why our teachers teach kids to read and do math, because that's helpful and hopeful to them in their future. In the same way, it's why we share about the love and the grace of Jesus Christ. Now, the big thing, and this is important, is that the ministry of teaching results in a lasting, eternal impact. So because you have something valuable to offer to the people around you, whether it be big or small, that stuff is of lasting and eternal impact. It can make a difference for a long time to come. This is from the book of Proverbs. Start your children off in the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. Okay? Now, some of you know my son. He's 5 years old. I can testify firsthand as a witness that if you start children off on the way they should go, they will often turn from it. With great consistency and determination, they will not do the things that they are told to do, okay? If you're a teacher in a classroom, testify, right? Did I? But I was also a youth minister for a lot of years, and when I spent that time with my kids, oftentimes I would see these teenagers and young people become united with Christ in high schools. They would learn about God's love and forgiveness and grace and wisdom, and then they would grow up, and in college or as young adults, they would reject the faith. They would stop going to church, they would stop praying, they would stop spending time with God, they would sort of get away from their faith walk, which is, a natural thing. It happens all the time. I also saw, I've been out of it long enough now, I've also seen these kids who had rejected their faith then find themselves in a life crisis, whether it be a relationship crisis or health or financial, sometimes just mistakes that they've made, gotten themselves in a tough spot. And I can't even count how many times I've seen it now, time after time after time. Kids that, that I know once loved Christ, reject him, and then when terrible things happen, suddenly they turn back to the Lord because they know that that's a place where they can find hope and guidance. That's a place where they can find what to do when they don't know what to do. They can find forgiveness and grace and move forward in a way that's constructive and positive and wonderful, right? So I believe that this proverb, this is what this is talking about, is that as we teach the people who need instruction, okay, we give to them a foundation, a bedrock, a toolkit, so that even if they don't always go the way that they go, they know that in their bones, in their roots, when they're confused, there's a place to go back to where they might find hope. The things that teachers offer in the classroom over and over again are things that kids return to. The things when we offer our faith to people are things over and over again that they can turn to. Your children, as they grow and make mistakes, it offers things that they can return to. This is what you and I are called to do. Now, this eternal impact stuff, also, Timothy's got something else to say about it that's really important as well. And the things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. And so this is sort of talking about how when we teach the secrets of the faith, when we teach about God's love and grace and forgiveness and hope, when we teach about that stuff, other people pick that up and they become teachers of the faith who in turn become teachers of the faith. There was a guy in the early 1800s, his name was Edward Kimball. I used this illustration a couple of years ago, so if you were here then, but if not, you won't know. But there's a guy named Edward Kimball, and Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher. He took it very seriously. Early 1800s, every Sunday, he taught third and fourth grade boys, okay? Woo! And they would come in, and he would teach them about the faith and the love and grace. And sometimes he would just attach to these kids. And it was a small town, and so they would grow up, and he would, go on to, follow up with them and make sure they were okay. And he would pray for them. Anyway, one day, one of these kids that he attached to was named Dwight Moody. This is Dwight. He's got an awesome beard. Anyway, this is not when he was in third grade. But when Dwight was a young man, he worked at a shoe store. And there Dwight was at the shoe store, and his Sunday school teacher, Edward Kimball, even though he hadn't been a Sunday school teacher for a while, showed up at the shoe store and said, "I've been praying for you, and God said that we need to talk. I just feel God saying that." And so him and Dwight and Edward went into the back room of the shoe store, and they prayed together. And Dwight Moody began to break down, saying that I feel hopeless and lost, and I know I need to come to Christ, and in that I will find strength. And so his third grade Sunday school teacher, who taught him the basics of God's love, prayed with him in the back of the shoe store. And his life was transformed. He began to teach and preach. He opened a publishing house. He became a sort of traveling Christian person. He went all over the country teaching about God's love and hope and peace. Anyway, one day at one of these meetings, there was this guy. His name was Wilbur Chamberlain. He doesn't have the cool beard or the cool hair. He's kind of a dork. But Wilbur Chamberlain, he was a member of a Presbyterian church, and he decided that he was going to go to one of these revival meetings that Moody was having. And so he went to the revival meeting, and suddenly he felt God touch him, spoke to him in a significant and wonderful way. So he went back to his home church, was a Presbyterian church. He was ordained as a Presbyterian minister, began to minister at various Presbyterian churches. Throughout his life, as he grew, he began to get more and more popular, and every once in a while, another church would have him to come over and speak at their church. And so he did. He came in as a guest speaker one day, and a young man attending the church that he was a guest speaker was named Billy Sunday. Now, Billy Sunday is my favorite. Billy Sunday was a professional baseball player. And he just wandered into church that day, and he heard this sermon. And he decided that he was going to give his life to Christ. And so eventually he did. He became a traveling evangelist as well. Billy Sunday's a funny dude. He really fired up. He loved the Lord, but man, he would read out these baseball stadiums, and he would give his sermons down on the field, and he would, without a microphone, which is amazing, and he would walk from first base to second base and give his sermon. At the end, he would slide into home plate and be like, "You're safe with Jesus." You know, this is what he would do. Super corny. But he, really dynamic guy, taught a lot of people about the love and the grace of Jesus Christ. And one of the men that he taught about the grace of Jesus Christ was this guy named Mordecai Ham. Now, Mordecai Ham was kind of stodgy. He was an academic, but for whatever reason, he latched on to Billy Sunday, kind of became an apprentice to him. And Mordecai ended up starting a publishing house and becoming an author. He wrote a lot of Christian literature, dissecting God's grace and hope, trying to understand our relationship with Christ and all of this stuff. And he would travel around and give lectures at various churches. One day, he was giving a lecture at a church, and after the lecture, he had a little back room, and he would invite anybody who wanted to ask further questions or needed prayer to come into the back room, and they would gather and have their prayer. So he gave the lecture, and after the prayer, a young man came up to him whose name was Billy Graham and began to pray with him. And Billy Graham obviously gives his life to Christ, begins his ministry, and all over the world he travels, beginning to teach about the love of grace and how we can be reset, forgiven by God's presence. When I was first decided I was going to go into ministry, my pastor's name was Randy, and Randy's life was significantly impacted by the Reverend Billy Graham in a way that transformed him, and then Randy ended up transforming me in a more significant way. So all that to say, now all of these preachers, right, I'm sure they said things in their sermon that I didn't agree with. I'm sure they had a varying of theology. But every one of them took it upon themselves, because of God's calling, to carry on this great tradition that we have. The tradition of learning about God's love, God impacting us in a significant and wonderful way, and then sharing that love with someone else. And all throughout history, for the last few thousand years, great, super preachers down to ordinary folks have found out about God's love and presence, and then taken upon themselves to respond to God's calling to share that love and grace with others. Folks, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the guy who was taught about God's love, and then this 2,000-year-old story of sharing hope after love, after grace, that story does not end with me. I'm going to make sure that I'm a part of this incredible tradition of taking the grace that is shown to me by others and show that to more people. So that for generations after ours, people can continue this tradition of knowing and seeing God's face and love. This is what the ministry of teaching is about, and this is why it has an eternal and significant impact. Now, when we teach, okay, that's kind of why it's important. When we teach, we also have to realize a couple of things. Teaching about God's love must be in both words and actions. And I know you know this. This is from Titus. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity and seriousness and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. You ever heard, everybody's heard it, the actions speak louder than words, right? It's completely true. That when we want to teach someone, if God has shown you grace, and you are just blown away by the power of God's forgiveness, you can't just tell somebody else about forgiveness. You have to find a person that's hurt you in a difficult way, a person that's hard to forgive, and forgive them. That's how we show grace. If God has been generous to you and blessed you in wonderful ways, you have to find people who need a blessing and bless them if you want to teach them about generosity. Folks, you and I are hooked up in a way that we not only teach with our words, while words are important, we teach with our actions, and the things that we do, we are able to find ways to bless the people around us. Now, teaching others is also much more than sharing information, right? It's training up in love. This is from the Psalms. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Teaching involves encouragement, right? Ask our teachers that are here today. It involves encouragement because sometimes trying to show someone about God's love or grace or their potential requires not only, hey, you can do it, it requires, hey, you can do it. Really, I promise, you can do it. I believe in you and what you're doing. It takes encouragement, it takes grace, it takes accountability at times. And so when you and I find the calling to share God's love and grace with other people, then we must not only share that information, but with certain people follow up with accountability and grace and encouragement in a way that will train them to be like God's children. Now, the ministry of teaching, because of all this, is also a great responsibility. This is from Matthew. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commandments and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And I share this to say that the knowledge and grace and experiences that God has given to you and you alone, God certainly gave those to you so that you could be formed and moved. But in a way, those experiences don't just belong to you. They belong to God. And because those experiences also belong to God, it is our responsibility not to keep them to ourselves. Now, I'm not talking about street corner preaching or going around trying to convert everybody. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sharing hope with the world. And if you have hope, you are commanded by God to share hope. It is your responsibility to do so. Now, here's the big thing. I've learned that whether you like it or not, you are teaching other people around you. You are. Especially if you have students or if you're a parent. You are teaching them stuff, okay? And the less you pay attention to what you're teaching them, the more you screw it up. And so it's important for you and I, because we realize that we are teaching no matter what, to be intentional about what we do. Okay? If I am not intentional about teaching my son about grace, then I'm going to probably end up teaching him about yelling, right? If I'm not intentional about teaching him about generosity, then I'm not going to. And what happens is if I'm not paying attention, I will slip back into habits that are not healthy for me, and he picks up on those. So, because we are teaching people, no matter what we do, we therefore must step back and say, God, I realize that you have given me influence over another human being, whether it be my child, my neighbor, my friend, my spouse. Let me teach them about grace, about hope, about forgiveness. Let me teach them about the positive things, not the negative, because like it or not, folks, unless you live in the mountain in a cabin by yourself, you are teaching the people around you something. And so we are called by God to take that responsibility seriously and teach intentionally about the love and the grace of God. Now, this is overwhelming. It's a lot, right? The idea that we are called by God to always be teachers. And so this is my sort of last word of hope, is that God is with us when we set out to share his love with those who are in need. Folks, you and I are called to do this incredible task of carrying on God's story, to make sure that the things that we show to our children or our neighbors or our friends or our coworkers, the things that we teach them, bring a blessing to their life, not a curse. And because that responsibility is so huge and often so difficult, God does not expect you to do it alone. God promises that if you set out to do this in the right way, to bless your students with grace and love, your children, your coworkers, if you set out to do this right, God says you will not be alone, that I will be with you to the end of days. that my grace, my presence, my Holy Spirit will be inside of you, enabling you to do things that you could not do on your own, enabling you to bless others in ways that you could not do alone. Folks, God is with you. So, we are challenged and encouraged by God to take all of these unique experiences that we have and use those to bless the world. And God says, if you try to do that, if you set out to do that in an intentional and a wonderful way, you don't go alone, but I go with you. So be at peace, and we'll do this work together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.